Welcome to the show, Nordic Leader Podcast today. We have with us George Bronten. He's a lifelong entrepreneur, started his first company in 1994, and that gives him more than 20 years of experience in the software space with a never-ending passion for sales and marketing. Since 2012, George and his team have been working on manbrain.com, and they have collaborated with thought leaders and studied research to identify the success factors behind successful sales organizations. Welcome, George, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And also we have, as usual, our great co-hosts, Nick Vertigans on one side of the pod.
Hi, Stefano. Hi, George.
Hi there.
And our super duper president, David Goddard.
Can you say that again?
Our super duper president, David Goddard.
Thank you. I'm going to put that on loop as the introduction. Hello, everybody. Hello, George.
Hi, David.
How did Stefano do with the pronunciation of your name?
For an Italian, I would say that was perfect.
I wanted to do the Swedish version, but it sounded impossible, so I went with the English one. We would start with your story as an entrepreneur. As we discussed before, you started the first company more than 20 years ago, which is quite a bit of time. You were saying before that your children are becoming big, and then that seems surreal. So a lot of time has passed in your personal life, but also in your professional life. And you have lived through the dot-com bust, very likely, survived. And you founded and grown two other companies on top of that after that. So let's say if you compare yourself as you are now, with all the understanding, the experience you have, to that young entrepreneur of 20 years ago, if you had to do anything differently, what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there are some things I would change during the growth of the companies. One example is that I should have found a leader for my second company earlier than I did. It was my baby and I didn't want to let it go. I didn't think that anyone else could do the job, which was, of course, not true. So I clinged on to that role for too long. So that's one example that I think I would do differently. And maybe setting it up for that point in time earlier, which could have been done by having a good mentor. And I didn't seek a mentor early on. I was basically just winging it and coming up with things and learning things along the way, which is great fun. I wouldn't take that away. I would probably find a mentor and mentors earlier.
How long have you gone before jumping on finding a new leader?
I founded that in 96. And I passed the baton to a new leader, I think it was 7 or maybe 8 years ago now. And I had already started developing the new company. And those two were going on in parallel. So it made me lose focus when starting the new project, which wasn't good. So I should have found that leader earlier, maybe 3 years earlier or something like that than I did.
We have two insights. One is about the importance of mentors early in your career. And the other insight that you've been talking about, it's about focus. So making space to find the focus for the right things that you want to really concentrate on.
Yeah, creating a structure earlier on as well, and understanding that a company is like an organism. There are many components that have to work together. And if you start off as an entrepreneur and do it the self-learned way that I did, those are not obvious things in the beginning. And if I would have had back then a mentor and a coach who could have explained that to me, that would have saved me a lot of time and headache. But always when you look back, and it's been a really fun journey. So maybe if I had that back then, maybe I would have lost out on a lot of fun as well. So it's always difficult when you want to change time. Yeah. From a company perspective, from a growing a company, that would have been the right response. From a sort of lifelong journey, learning, testing, maybe I did the right thing there because it's been a fun ride.
Cool. Nick, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks, George. So from a lifelong kind of fun, experiential journey, what kind of leader are you today, George?
That's a difficult one to respond to when you have to self-grade or self-assess. But I think I'm a visionary. I like to see things as they can become And I can identify gaps and problems in the status quo, and I can see how those could improve. And hopefully I can get people on that journey with me and create that enthusiasm to say, oh, hey, this is a problem we have to solve. We're going to take over the world. Let's do it together. So I think maybe that's my strength, that I can think ahead. And I don't know, as a leader, I guess the weakness of that is that I move fast, and I need people around me who can maybe pick up on the things that I didn't follow through on. So I need that operational, managerial component, and I need that to be complemented to my sort of more entrepreneurial, visionary side.
Okay, so I'm sensing that you're describing people who can maybe slow you down a bit, pace you a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I get a lot of ideas, and even though I find all of them to be super, they're not, right? I need people around me who can say, yeah, that's great, but you can have an idea, but if you don't have the resources to execute it well, you might as well not do it, perhaps, right now.
So how do you find the right teammates, the right colleagues, the right partners to pace you, to slow you down, maybe to ask the right questions? How do you go about doing that?
That's the hard part, right? First off, you have to find people who think the journey that you're on is fun, right? Is meaningful, and they want to be on that journey with you. And then once you have that, of course, then you need to have those skills that you may be lacking as an entrepreneur. And that's a self-assessment thing, and something that takes time to learn. What are my weaknesses? Where do I need help? But then, as always, when recruiting people, you never really know until you start working together how well you will work together. But you can do your best in conveying your values, conveying your vision and mission, asking the right questions, and getting the sort of the skill sets on par with what the task at hand. But it's first when you start actually to work together, I think that's when these things, of course, are crystallized.
Yeah, of course.
I do have a small framework that I have in my mind when it comes to relationships, which is trust, align, grow. First, we have to trust each other. And once we trust each other, we can find alignment in what we're trying to accomplish. And then we will both grow together. And as soon as we get off balance there, if we stop trusting each other, or if we're not in alignment, then there will be no growth. I usually take the example, if you find someone that you really like, early days, I'm beyond this, but, and you say, oh, we can get a life together, and you trust each other, and you're aligned with everything. But then your biggest dream is to start a family, have kids, and the other person says, I don't want kids. Okay, then you're no longer in alignment, and you have to, what am I going to do now? I might trust you, but there's no alignment, so we have to make a decision here.
Would you share that model, that trust, align, grow model? Would you share that with someone that you're bringing onto your team before they start?
Absolutely. Even also with customers, and I blogged about this on our blog. But I think this is a good model to have in mind also with clients, right? Because unless you have your clients trust you and you trust them, and then you align with what you can help them do, then there will be no growth. And I think in our society, we're always trying to take shortcuts. Like, we want the growth, but we don't take time to really align. We just want to sell our wares. And I think that's problematic. And we've had this discussion ourselves in our own company, and it can be very difficult because we, for instance, sell software to help salespeople be more effective. But sometimes the client doesn't know what they're trying to do. Quite honestly, they know they want to sell more, and they think buying a piece of software is a good idea. But when really digging down and asking what are you trying to accomplish, they oftentimes cannot answer in detail what they're trying to accomplish. And that makes it really hard then to measure and see, are we helping you out? Are you getting to where you want? And then you can, after a half a year, when things get troublesome, perhaps like friction within their company, change management issues, basically, if you don't have a clear goal and you're not aligned with that goal because there is no clear goal, everything gets very messy sometimes.
Maybe it leads to just a short-term, quick fix rather than long-term sustainable growth and happy customers and happy team members. So, George, it's really interesting. David, what I'm hearing so far from George is I'm hearing a very balanced self-assessment of himself, talking about strengths and weaknesses. And I'm loving this trust, align, grow approach to relationships and business relationships. What have you heard so far?
Very balanced approach. It would be interesting, George, to hear a little bit more about the first and the third bits there, the trust and the growth, how they work in practice. So the alignment comes in the middle. How do you build trust, first of all?
I think the simplest way is to deliver on your promises, right? If you tell me you're going to help me do something, I'm going to move, you're going to help me move, and you don't show up, my trust level with you goes down. I had an example with a guy I was speaking with the other week, and he explained that one of the leaders in a previous company talked a big game about family and family values and how the company was like a family. But the person actually had 2 affairs on the side and just was not living up to those values that he wanted to have in the company. So I think also congruence with your values and with what you communicate is really important, because if you say one thing and do another, that's going to lower the trust for you.
That's a great answer. It's also a very Nordic answer. So I've asked this question in a lot of places, and usually the first answer is keep your promises. I do get a slightly different answer in, let's say, traveling south from the Nordic area, or even traveling east.
David, could you give me an example of that? What answer would they give you?
Usually the relationship is stressed. So get to know each other and understand the values and where you're coming from. And then you're in a good place to start making promises and try to keep those promises.
Which goes back to alignment. I can't align with you if I don't understand you.
Absolutely.
In Italy, it goes back to the dinner table, having dinner together and starting the relationship like that.
Yeah.
Francis Fukuyama classified cultures into high trust and low trust cultures, and Sweden and Finland are high trust cultures. Italy is a little bit further down the scale. So in the high trust culture, your default position is that you trust someone, and the trust is there to be maintained. In the low trust culture, you don't trust someone, especially if you don't know them. So you need to build the relationship first in the low trust cultures so that you can then get aligned. The other part of the equation there, so the trust and the alignment and the growth. So with 25 years of experience as leader, sales and marketing expert, entrepreneur, what kind of advice would you give to your young self starting out in trying to grow your company?
What's really important is to understand the problem you're trying to solve from the customer's perspective. I think all too often we come up with an idea, fantastic idea or a product that can do something, but it's very inside out. So we think customers should buy this or should get this because it's fantastic. But if you don't know your customer well enough, that might fall very flat. My first idea when I was still in school was when I went to the lunch restaurants, I always found their menus to suck. They were ugly, they were too long. So my idea was to help these lunch restaurants to create beautiful menus. I thought it was a brilliant idea, but it was, of course, from a business perspective, complete madness. They didn't care anything about it. They didn't sell more lunches because they had a beautiful menu, and they didn't really care at all. So I think really understanding your customer is key, and that I've stumbled upon that many times, that I've tried to sell something that I find to be fantastic and beautiful and great, but the customer doesn't have the problem, so they're not going to buy it. Always start with the customer's problem or challenge. They know their problems and they know usually where they want to go. If you can come in there and figure out that solution to whatever problem is they have, that's interesting. But don't create the solution without confirming the problem, is what I'm trying to say.
Frame this way, it sounds a lot like the job of the therapist rather than the sales guy, doesn't it?
I guess, yeah, you have to diagnose and you have to understand what you're trying to solve, and that it has any value for the buyer, and that they want to shell out money for it. That's the next thing. You can solve a lot of problems, but are they willing to actually pay you for it?
So your fancy menus were not creating enough value?
Definitely not. No,
Did you ever start that company, George?
it wasn't a company. It was just I was still in school, and I thought that was a problem to be solved.
Actually, I've written it down. I think it's quite a good business idea. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's 2020. I think it's a good idea now. George, if you had a mentor at that time, do you think that your mentor would have said, hey, hang on a minute, stop here?
I hope so. If it was a good mentor.
Would you then have missed that learning?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess that's what, when you look back and try to change stuff, you could trip up yourself when doing so. So that was a good learning experience. And also, I think what that made me learn was also how to design a menu, which taught me how to use Photoshop, which taught me da. So everything you jump into and try, you learn new things, which make you grow and maybe be able to take on that next challenge in a better way.
In your present company, how do you ensure that learning is taking place in the organization?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. By always adding new goals, challenging goals for us to go after that cause us to force ourselves outside of the status quo to try new things and learn new things. And it's one of the core values we have. One of the values is always improve. So from the first interview, that's something we talk about. If I ask someone, why are you doing it this way? And they say, that's how it's always been made. That's the worst thing someone can tell me in my company, because we're not going to do things as we've always done them just because that's the safe way to do. We have to ask ourselves, is this the right way to do it? And if it's not, we change it. So always be improving is one of those sort of values that we really push hard, and ask people, what was the latest book you read? What do you do on a Tuesday evening? If you hear from their responses, if they're keen learners, they have read a book recently and they're reading another book right now. So you can hear in an interview if a person always has that continuous learning mindset, and they bring that into the company.
It makes me wonder about that interview process and what it is that you're doing in the interview to identify that mindset.
You can, when you talk to someone and you explain this idea of always be learning and looking for new knowledge and seeing fun in taking on something new, you can see in their eyes if that resonates with them. With someone who has this mindset, it's glittering all over them. It's like, yeah, I can't wait. I have to tell you about this latest book. Yeah, Stefano is one of those.
Yeah, I'm kind of refraining from getting into discussion and telling about the last book, which I finished yesterday.
Yeah.
What was it? What was it, Stefano?
It was a book on the fear of death from Irvin Yalom called Staring at the Sun. Quite a beautiful book.
Okay, that's great. And the same question to George. What's a recent book, George, that you've enjoyed, or some recent learning that you've enjoyed?
Yeah, my wife mocks me because I'm a business book nerd. I almost only read business books, which is maybe a bit embarrassing. And you can read a lot of books, but not all books give a lasting impression on you. Of course, one of the books that I keep on quoting is The Checklist Manifesto by a surgeon who introduced checklists for surgeons to reduce the number of deaths and complications. And they reduced deaths with 47% by introducing something as simple as checklists. That was a fascinating book to read because it's very similar to what we do in Membrane, where we try to introduce structure in selling. But salespeople cross their arms and say, I don't need no checklist. I know this. I'm a sales guy. Just like the surgeons said when he introduced the concept of checklists, they said, I don't need a checklist. I've been a surgeon for 25 years.
Nick, what do you do on a Tuesday night?
This Tuesday, I was playing chess with my son.
Who won?
He won. He won.
Good.
He won. And after that, we played Connect 4, which I won. So that gives you an idea of where we both are, as father and son. David, what about you?
I think that actually this whole podcasting thing has been just a wonderful learning curve for me. And one of the learnings that I've come to is I tend to think about the whole process in podcasting forwards in a linear way. It might be good to sometimes think it backwards. What's the audio product at the end of this that will create value for our listeners? And then what are the steps that I need backwards to get to that? Do you do that in the sales process, George, that you think backwards?
That's what we should do more of. Everyone who's selling should do more of that, to find out what the customer really needs and wants, and then align with that backwards, instead of just pushing whatever they have and hope that it sticks.
As a last area of exploration, George, I found a quite interesting quote on your profile on LinkedIn. You said that after spending years of hiring and firing salespeople, you realized that your leadership was the main problem. So that kind of sounds like a real awakening moment to me. What was that you realized, and how did you react to that?
Yeah, that was a tough moment. I realized that I had been making a lot of assumptions on what makes a good salesperson. I basically thought a salesperson was born. It's that kind of guy or girl who's very outspoken, very social, very extroverted, doesn't take no for an answer, very competitive. That wasn't at all the type of salesperson I needed. I realized after thinking about it, but I made that mistake that I thought, okay, they should know how to sell because they've sold somewhere else for some other company. So that was a big one. And that's when I really started studying everything about sales. I read all the books and went to the courses and went to the networking events. And I saw that this is a problem a lot of people are making. It's not just me. The big takeaway was I'm assuming a lot. I'm making a lot of decisions on faulty assumptions. And that is leading to very costly mistakes. And when it comes to my leadership, because of those assumptions, I wasn't training them enough. I wasn't providing them with a process. I wasn't providing them with enough coaching. I had an inferior compensation model. It was just everything basically was wrong. And that's why I wrote my book called Stop Killing Deals, which talks about these things, that we can't be making decisions based on faulty assumptions.
That's a big one. First of all, because it requires a lot of introspection to realize that you are actually making assumptions, because the very fact of making assumptions kills the introspection itself. So there definitely has been a change in the way how you were thinking about the whole process, the whole yourself, actually, that helped you getting this introspection. So that, I think, is a very big one. I think it was a very deep moment for you. That's how it felt. How about you guys?
Yeah, it sounds to me like George has benefited maybe from a lot of coaching and mentoring, but maybe I should ask George that. Is that so,
yeah.
George?
No, most definitely. And that goes back to my suggestion to my younger self: get mentoring, get coaching. And I think also mentoring and coaching is interesting because they're two different things in my head. A mentor can be really someone who's been there, done that. Whereas a coach is someone who can help you help yourself by asking the right questions that brings out the best of you. So I guess I would have rather had a coach in some instances, and sometimes a mentor.
George, do you have an example where coaching has really helped you?
Yeah, I have several coaches, and it's always very helpful. In my career, I haven't built huge companies, but I've been the sole entrepreneur, meaning I haven't had a co-founder that I really could do a one-on-one with. So coaching has always been important to me. Every time I have a challenge, I need a coach. Basically, it's that simple. I need to talk to the right coach. If it's a health issue, I need my health coach. If it's a business issue, I need one of the business coaches. But I think it's just crucial, because even though you can think things through in your head, but you're limited based on your biases and of course assumptions that you hold. So it's always really valuable to have a good coach in there who can unlock those doors for you.
That's great. And that's so important in terms of asking for help and knowing where to go. And you create an image in my head of having, I don't know, about 17 different coaches for different scenarios and challenges, which wouldn't that be great if we all had, maybe not 17, 2 or 3 people that we would go to that are pros.
When you think about it, I don't know why people don't have it. And one sort of argument could be, I can't afford it, which is a very silly argument. Because not having a coach is going to cost millions in lost opportunity. You can't not have a coach. It's just, if you're an entrepreneur and don't have coaches, well, good luck.
Hey, George, thank you. You're doing some sales work for us.
Yes, fantastic. This is the best act we ever had.
Good.
I'm gonna make that the episode title.
Get a coach now. Get a
Yes.
3 from this call.
But it's a smart thing, isn't it? And if you think about the number of brilliant entrepreneurs who probably haven't engaged with a coach, whose ideas could have grown, could have developed into something much more than just what was inside their own heads. It's such an important thing to ask for help, to know where to go.
There's also a huge difference in a good coach and an average coach and a superior, super duper coach.
Thank you, George.
I've had many coaches, and I think a coach also needs to be brave to also challenge the person and get that person out of their comfort zone. Because I've had coaches who've basically gone through the motions. I've studied coaching myself, read the books, I've gone to a lot of courses because I think it's fascinating. And you can hear when a coach is just going through the motions, they're asking the right questions at the right time. But that's not what you need. You need someone who asks the sort of the tough question and the pushback. And George, you just said this. Do you mean that? Do you know what you just said? Do you know what that means? What does it mean for you? And push back on what the person is saying.
What's the question that we should have asked you today?
No, I think you asked the typical thing. What would you have changed if you go back? But depending on who's listening, I think the calling of an entrepreneur is to fix stuff and improve things and create new solutions. And I guess knowing when not to pursue something is just as important as knowing when to pursue something. And this is a common and obvious reference point maybe, but I love Steve Jobs when he said to his team, like, how many no's have you given today? Like, you have to learn how to say no to get to that focus on the one thing that matters or the few things that matter. I think as entrepreneurs, including myself, we have a tendency to run on every opportunity or treat every idea as equally good, and they're not. We just have to focus a lot more.
That sounds like a great ending for this episode to me. Do we have a quote, David, for today? Or?
Well, we just have one.
Okay, this one. Okay.
So instead, I'll give a statistic, which is from the World Economic Forum, and that is that the half-life of a skill in the workplace has changed from an average of 30 years to 6 years. So today's pod has actually been all around learning, the theme of learning and continuous learning, and how that impacts your growth as a leader and also as an organization.
What a genius. What a surprising genius you are. We were all expecting a quote.
So thank you. Thanks a lot, George, for the chat. It was really inspiring. I have lived a lot of what you said myself on my skin, so I really empathized. I really am close to that experience as well. So thanks a lot for coming. It was beautiful to have you here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Hey listener, it's Stefano here. Since you got until here, we think that you might like the podcast. It would mean so much if you could leave us a 5-star review and share this with as many of your friends as possible. This will help us be discovered and spread the news. Can you just take 5 minutes and do that for us? Thank you.